Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Maybe just for introductions, being in Finland is really a true honor for me, as this country and its culture very early on in my life provided a major inspiration that really set my path in my career. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the 1990s Finnish demo scene. The demo scene was really kind of a mix of design, art, and science. And when I was a 12-year-old, I saw these demos, and for me, just pure magic. Around the same time, I got familiar with a man called Marshall McLuhan. He's a Canadian media theorist who studied the effects of technology on culture. But as a teen, really what caught my eye was this notion that technology is an extension of the human body, or as he says, it extends the reach of our embodied mind beyond our natural limits. And he took this concept really to the extreme, as he writes here in 1964. The shovel is an extension of the hands, the wheels is an extension of the feet, the book is an extension of the eye, and electric circuits are an extension of our central nervous system. And if you think about it, today we are really in the golden age of extensions. We just call it slightly differently. The name that is quite popular nowadays is augmentation. The reason we call it augmentation is to no small part due to Douglas Engelbart, a researcher who put a bit of a Californian spin on it. But today we are seeing these methods being applied across industries. So here's some examples. I had an opportunity of working in music, and when I got into this in the mid-90s, we had extremely expensive technology that was super difficult to learn, and hence only experts bothered. And in contrast, today we have easy-to-use music-making tools everywhere, and millions of people are making music. Just think about auto-tune that allows you to sing like a professional through augmentation. Today we're at the point where the majority of singers depend on auto-tune, and it's even become the source of entire music genres. What about writing? This is another area I had the opportunity of working on a bit. If you look at typewriters, an augmentation that is very expensive, highly manual, and done relatively by few. In contrast, every single one of you depends on auto-tune every day. And progressively, we depend on things like autocomplete. Finally, I had the opportunity of working a bit in video production. So dramatic changes in this industry, and I think you don't have to look any further than what's happening in China. So, at the top you have virtual newscasters that are not on the mainstream news, or just this month, there's this new viral app that allows you to upload faces and then superimpose them on all the famous movies. And of course, the deep fake hype or fear, we've all been exposed to it, so there's a huge political debate now going on about effects of augmentation systems. Most recently, I started to really have an interest in what is the downsides of these systems, what are the effects, the cultural effects, etc. And that's where I rediscovered McLuhan. So McLuhan, he was tremendously concerned about the blindness we have towards the downside of technology. And later in his life, he developed a bunch of theories that are lumped in the tetrad. These are 4 laws that framed us questions that are really useful to analyze what the effects are from augmentation and technology on culture. And one of the key insights here for me has been that every extension, every augmentation has an unintended counterpart. And he called it amputation, which commonly speaking is removal of limbs, but we mean a slightly different thing in this context. So I'm going to quote McLuhan from his 1964 book, Understanding Media. Every extension of mankind, especially technological extensions, has the effect of amputating or modifying another extension. The extension of a technology like the automobile amputates the need for a highly developed walking culture, which in turn causes cities and countries to develop in a different way. And so, what has happened since '64? Look at the automobile, the augmentation at the moment. We have the ability to go from A to B really fast. It extends our feet in that way. It's a marvelous invention. And the amputative effects that are less discussed, accidents, nearly 1.3 million deaths in the US alone in 1 year, far worse than terrorism, pollution. This is a major factor to climate change, traffic jams, and finally, just general decrease in quality of life. So I think you can start to get a sense the augmentation comes with a side of amputation. And one of the insights here is an assumption we have when we build augmentation systems is increased horsepower means increased responsibility. The more PS your car has, you're supposed to be more responsible. But I think you can extend this notion and say increased horsepower also has increased complex behavioral side effects, amputation. In the example of cars, when you're driving at 120 kilometers an hour, it has effects on your psychology. You can measure them, you become potentially more egotistical, etc. So let's continue with McLuhan. The telephone extends the voice, but also amputates the art of penmanship gained through regular correspondence. So augmentation, the telephone or the smartphone or whatever device you want to call it, the phone is an extension of the eyes and the ears. It allows us instant global communication. It's pretty much a superpower. On the flip side, as powerful as the superpower is the amputation here, which is situational awareness and attention loss. You see this in these pictures, people giving a massage while they're looking at their smartphone. It might seem comedic, but it's actually happening at a massive scale. Addiction and depression. There's a scientifically studied connection between mobile phones everywhere and addiction and depression. And finally, surveillance and control, which for good reasons is not discussed as much as it should be. It gives a lot of state actors and so forth tremendous powers. So again, augmentation leads to amputation. There's a dynamic interplay here. So finally, McLuhan continues, these are just a few examples, and almost everything we can think of is suspect to similar observations. We have become people who regularly praise all extensions and minimize all amputations. This was written 50 years ago, and I think it is extremely relevant right to this point. And you look at, this Pokemon, this is a real thing somebody had to put up in a zoo. No matter how many Pokemons are dancing in his enclosure, if you enter, the bison will kill you. It's not a joke, somebody had to put this up. I mean, think about it. That's the effect of, amputation at work. Which brings us to a really extreme form of amputation, which is called dehumanization. And I think this study really makes the point what is dehumanization effect of technology. It's a study from the University of Queensland of Technology, and they surveyed a lot of drivers. And they found that more than half of all the car drivers think cyclists are not complete human. And there's a link between dehumanization of a bike rider and acts of deliberate aggression towards them. They even have a dehumanization scale where they test people psychologically where they think that a bike rider would fit on. I don't think it's as low as a cockroach, but it is clearly lower as a human. I think we need to study these kinds of effects as well in everyday digital technology, because this link between technology, augmentation, and dehumanization is extremely understudied, but likely significant. So if you're interested, research things like databases and the dehumanization effect of them, what the effects are when you are being pressed into a bunch of numbers as humans, or the militarization. Think about a drone pilot that is on a joystick somewhere in the desert of Nevada, and think about what the psychology of him is shooting down somebody in Afghanistan. That's a dehumanization effect. Or finally, automation in general, which is a mega trend of our time. What are the dehumanization effects here? So at this point, help, amputation, dehumanization, it seems very serious, and what can we do? And the industry's approach so far, you can start to see a pattern. You have things like human-centered design, which is developing lots of frameworks and so forth to help think this through. There's more recently things like human-centered AI. When I saw that, I had to tweet this image. That is human-centered AI, in my opinion. So the industry in general, I think if you summarize all these things, you get to this position, more human-centered technology. Or you just read the bold stuff, more technology. And my question really is this the appropriate focus or approach? Are we on the right track here? And I want to stop here for a moment. Just give you some perspective about the planet in 2019. The Amazonas is burning. We've all heard about that. Deforestation is close to a tipping point. It could turn the hydrological cycle unable to support its ecosystems in just a few generations. Or biodiversity, very important topic right now. We have a 58% decline in vertebrates since 1970s. It brings tears to my eyes, these kinds of stats. And we all know it, we hear it every day. But still, I think this is absolutely appalling. This is frightening. And I don't even want to get to climate change. It is very serious. And so let's go back to this industry answer. Are we focusing on the right issues? Is human centrism maybe too narrow of a perspective here? And so my question has more and more become, how do we extend our perspective beyond human centrism, beyond just technology? And what do we really focus our attention on instead? So this brings us to life-centered design. And I want to really be very clear here, this is much more an open question, an ongoing question, a lived question, than an answer. And I would like to just give you some perspective and some thoughts, but it's much more about having a discussion, figuring out together what this is. So for some perspective, let's zoom out again. There's 3 trillion trees on planet Earth. 3 trillion. That's about 400 trees for each and every one of you here. It's a tremendous number. Plants actually outweigh all other life on this planet. And not just by a little bit. The entirety of life on planet Earth is 550 gigatons of carbon. Sounds like a lot. Plants are 450 gigatons of that, and humans are 0.06. So we are actually neglectable in terms of the biomass on this planet. And if you look at that little arrow there, that is the focus of the designer. That's really what we're focused on as a discipline. So we can ask, what is then life-centered design? And if human-centered design is where the human, or let's call it the ego, is at the center of design, life-centered design is where the ecosystem is at the center. It's a reformation of a relationship with living beings, from plants to animals. It's a very clear focus that biodiversity loss and climate change must be at the center of a design or technology practice going forward. And so a further point here is a realization that technology alone is not the answer. This is a Victor Papanek quote. And I want to ask, what is the appropriate role of technology? I want to give you some examples that caught my attention. So one of these questions life-centered design might ask is, how do we augment our ability to design with and for trees? This is an example that they mapped every tree on planet Earth with satellites and machine learning. And you get these maps out that inform designers and ecologists and urban planners. Or you can ask, how do we augment our ability to collaborate with insects? And then an extremely interesting category of life on Earth. And of course, right now we are in a peak moment for insect farming. I was just last week at an insect conference. You have innovations like mealworm feces zigzag separation simulation. There's a few examples, there are hundreds of these. Or you can ask, how can we augment our ability to farm food locally in cities, which is becoming really a necessity as supply chains collapse due to climate change. But I think, I showed you some tech stuff. In my playbook, actually, low-tech or no-tech is often much more preferable than high-tech or tech at all. If we can use a nature-based solution to fix something, why actually build a giant machine to do it? So this example, there's a group in Vienna that are building an alternative food production system that grows mushrooms in the heart of the city and making this scalable. So in summary, what is life-centered design? Life-centered design is where ecosystems are at the center, a reformation of our relationship with all living beings, a realization that technology alone is not the answer, but can be helpful. And finally, life-centered design is an open question and an invitation for discussion. So I want to thank you with that, and I'm happy to take questions.